Hello, good evening. Uh, I tell you, I feel like I've been to a gospel meeting after that Devo. That was impressive. Really good. So we are starting a new lesson series tonight, as I guess you know, considering I'm standing up here and not Stephen. This lesson series is called 12 Were Chosen. You see the workbooks that we just handed out. It's a study of the original apostles. So we're going to be studying the original 12 apostles. I don't know why they really named that, because we actually study Matthias and Paul in one of the last lessons. So I'm not really. So it is the study of the original apostles and Matthias and Paul. So that's what we're doing. So let me get you a little familiar with this book. So this student workbook, really, you can use it how you want to use it. It can be for notes. You can do work on the lesson before class, during class, after class, however you choose to do it. If you open up to lesson 1, which is where we're going to be tonight, you'll see how all these lessons are going to be set up in your workbook here. They're all going to have on the left the points of the lesson. So there's either 3, some of them have 2, some of them have more, and the 3 main points that we'll go over and that we'll want to hit. And you want to write notes down for those 3 main points, and you'll have discussion questions. Those discussion questions we'll cover those as we go through the lessons, but they're really more for you than they are for the end of this lesson to go through this as a discussion. We'll be discussing it throughout the lessons. So I think this is going to be a really good lesson for us. This, by the way, I do want to give some props to where this came from. As I was searching for some material for this lesson, I came across this Bible Talk TV, which I'd never heard of before, and really impressive. I'm sorry, BibleTalk.tv, really impressive. So it is. It's from Brethren in the Church of Christ as well. Tons and tons of content. I was very surprised. This lesson is David Latin, I think is how you say his name. I think he's from a congregation in Oklahoma, and he's very prominent on this site. The amount of content is pretty shocking, and it's very good. Not all, as we all know, not all churches of Christ are delivering what they're supposed to be delivering, so you have to be careful. But I haven't found anything from the material on the site that I would question. It's all been pretty solid. So I would recommend, if you want personal Bible studies or information, or if you want to look at this lesson, there's PDFs on there of this lesson also. I feel free to go there. I would also direct you to our website. So our website has been renovated, and if you go to comingchurchofchrist.org, and if you go to the resources link on our website, there's tons of resources in there under different topics. Underneath Christian media, I think that's what it is, you'll find a link to Bible Talk TV, and just click and go right there. So I would encourage you to do that too. I would encourage you anyway to go check out the website. It's kind of our first phase 1 of the website, as we look to our website to become a tool of evangelism in a much bigger way for our congregation. All right, so 12 were chosen, study of the original apostles. So let me just walk through what these lessons are that we're going to go through. So tonight, we're going to start with Introduction to the Apostles. I don't think we're going to finish tonight, so we'll probably do that in the next couple of weeks. And then we go through and we talk about, we focus specifically on the 12 original apostles. So the next lesson is Peter, then the next lesson is Andrew. Then we start to double up, James and John, then Philip and Nathaniel, Matthew and Thomas. We talk about Simon the Less, Simon the Zealot, and Judas, not Iscariot. And then 8th lesson is Judas Iscariot. And then our 9th lesson is Matthias and Paul, and then our 10th lesson will be faith. So it's 10 weeks, probably be more than 10 weeks, knowing how we are with our class time. All right. Let's just dive into this thing then. think that's all I wanted to say as far as setup goes. All right, so introduction of the apostle. So Jesus, when he began his ministry, early on when he began his ministry, crowds began to grow. Crowds of disciples began to grow. From this crowd of disciples, he called out 12 men, and he designated them as apostles, which is what the 12 men we're going to learn about. So from our viewpoint, because we have the whole story, what we have are 12 pretty ordinary men. There wasn't anything extraordinary about these men. And I like to say extraordinary instead of extraordinary because it's more definitive. There wasn't anything extraordinary about these 12 men at all. As a matter of fact, you might say that they were extraordinary in their ordinariness. They were very ordinary people. We can take a lot of lessons from that, and we will as we go through and look at each individual, and we'll look at that tonight as well in a little more depth. So they weren't selected for social status. They weren't selected for education. We know that for sure. They weren't selected because they were religious leaders of any kind, and they certainly weren't selected for their political connections either. They were simply ordinary people, just like the ordinary people sitting in this auditorium tonight. That is not a coincidence and not a mistake. That's on purpose. These were ordinary people and weren't extraordinary leaders and government leaders and those types. That was on purpose. And we'll see that as we go through and see the examples that we can learn from as we look at these men. So Jesus, when he selected these 12, he knew the wealth of raw materials that he was working with. He knew what each man possessed, good and bad, and he knew what ultimately they would become later on in their lives. So one of the key lessons that we'll learn over and over and we'll repeat over and over because it's very valuable and very important is how these men turn their lives over to Jesus. And as they turn their lives over to Jesus, they became stronger. They became more courageous. They became better at delivering their message. Well, everyone, all of them except for Judas Iscariot, of course. So that is the overall message for us, that as these 12 men, as they turned their life over to Christ, every step they took to give more to Christ and give less of themselves, they became more extraordinary. And so as we go through this lesson, we'll see that happening with these apostles. And we can start to look at our own lives and see that that's the way it really works for us as well. So we've all been gifted in that way. We've been gifted to turn things that we think are very ordinary into things that are extraordinary. Think about the things we do as Christians that seem really ordinary, that you wouldn't give a second thought to. And yet, they have such a great impact. I'll give you an example. I was telling somebody this Sunday, I believe, that this just popped in my head. There was a man named James when we were in Knoxville. James he'd been raised in the church, but he fell away for a long, long time. And while we were there, he just showed back up and started coming to the building again, and not with any thoughts of, do anything. He just thought, it's kind of nostalgia. But over a period of time, he listened to lessons. And I met him, I liked him, and we talked a lot. We liked barbecue, and we liked other things. He liked Alabama football, and we were in Tennessee, so we talked about that a lot and how wrong he was. And James ended up coming back to Christ. I didn't think anything of it. I thought, thank goodness, James. I'm so proud of you, man. So proud of you. He's a deacon now in that congregation. Great man. Just a good dude. I didn't realize that I had an influence on James. I had an influence on him because we talked about how bad Alabama football was and how much I disliked it and liked Tennessee football, which isn't really true anymore considering we live in Georgia. I didn't realize the fact that, when we shook hands, we started out here and really came at it and shook hands, and there was a loud noise when we shook hands. I didn't take any of these things into account because it's just what we do, But those things have an effect. Those ordinary things have a major, major effect. So as we talk about the apostles tonight and through this series and how Jesus chose them and why Jesus chose them, and as we look at them individually and we see what they were not and how ordinary they were, those are the types of things we need to remember, that our lives are change agents. Everything we do in our life is a change agent for Christ. And these men were no different. We'll see their growth as we go through these lessons. We'll see it tonight. If we get to a certain point, we'll see their growth from the time they were selected to the time they were, the Holy Spirit came onto them and they received the power to be the representatives of Christ's message. So, they were extraordinary because of the little things that they did. So what they learned pretty clearly was that the power of God, the power that they had, was not in them, but it was in God. They were just the stewards of that power. So it took them a while to learn that, and we'll see that too, because they did think some things of themselves, and they thought they were human beings, so they thought they should be more than they were. But ultimately, they learned that the power is not in them; it's in God. We'll talk about that in a minute too, because I was about to go off on another topic, and I thought, you know what? I'm actually gonna hit on that later. So today we dedicate our lives to the Lord. We apply the apostles' teachings in everything that we do. So in the series of lessons, we're going to look at these men. We're going to look at their failures. We're going to look at their successes. And we're going to learn from both of those things. And hopefully we'll grow from it. So, I got the thing. Nice. So there are our three things. You'll see that in your student book. Those are our three points we're going to hit tonight. Well, we're not going to hit all those tonight, but we'll try hard. We're going to look at the difference between what an apostle is and a disciple. That's what I really want to get through tonight because it's pretty interesting. It seems really obvious, but when you get man involved and the world involved, it stops being simple. We're going to look at the selection of the 12. A lot of things we can learn from how the 12 were selected, how Christ selected the 12, and some of their differences as individuals and how that worked within this group. And then finally, this lesson, we'll talk about what the apostles had to overcome. And for us, those are direct lessons for us from the apostles themselves. We see the things they had to overcome are exactly the same things that we have to overcome as well. So let's jump into the difference between a disciple and an apostle. Anybody have anything they want to say or any questions? Because if I don't stop and say that, I'll just plow right through this. And very good. All right, let's go on. All right, difference between a disciple and apostle. So in the Gospels, we understand these two terms pretty clearly through the Gospels. In the Gospels, the term disciple, it's used to describe both followers of Christ in general, but it's also used to describe these 12 men specifically. Disciple, especially in this time period, turn of the century, was a really common term, and it was a really common thing. It's a term for somebody who is a learner, a pupil, a student, a follower of a specific teacher. That's what a disciple is. That's what a disciple was in this first century. It's also when you're a disciple of someone, of a teacher, you're elevating that teacher to another status as well. So if I'm a disciple of Jesus and I'm following him in the first century, I'm actually elevating him to a status of a leader. So it's a little bit more than just a teacher. It's actually a leader that I'm following. I have more of a emotional input into what this person is saying. And so it's a much deeper relationship than just a regular teacher. So in this time, disciples would attach themselves to a teacher. They'd even travel with that teacher for a little while. Some disciples traveled with Jesus for a period of time. Some traveled with them for a long time, like the apostles. Some traveled with him everywhere. But mostly at this time, you might have, Jesus would come to a town and create disciples, or disciples would be there. They might follow him around the town, and when he left, they would go back to their lives and their homes. That was pretty normal. They might follow him around a region for a period of time, but most would leave and go back to their homes, hopefully with that message, going back to deliver that message back to their homes. But that was pretty normal. And then you had those few that would stick with that teacher for a long time, like these 12 that we're talking about. So let's look at the dictionary definition for disciple. We're going to look at this for disciple, and we want to look at it for apostle as well. So this is just the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, just the regular old definition. And this one's pretty good. Disciple. So a disciple is one who accepts and assists in spreading the doctrines of another. Yeah, pretty close. That's what a disciple is. It gets a little bit interesting here. One that accepts and assists in spreading the doctrines of another, such as, I guess it's in Christianity, one of the 12 in the inner circle of Christ's followers, according to the gospel accounts. Very good, Merriam-Webster dictionary. You're getting it. Or it's a convinced adherent of a school or individual, so a disciple of Freud. So that's what it is, and that's what a disciple is. So even in Jesus' day, that's what a disciple was. And then, of course, down here they go into a specific denomination, Disciples of Christ, founded in the U.S. in 1809. Really interesting. I know that Steve is going to talk about. I think you're talking about the start of other denominations, so I don't want to steal any thunder here. But this is I found this really interesting just because I had the term disciple in it. It's now in the definition, the official definition of disciple. I just love this. I don't love it, but it's just, it cracks me up. A member of Disciples of Christ founded in the U.S. in 1809. Now, for us, with the understanding that we have of the founding of the church and what the church is, the idea that this church was founded in 1809, it's just really comical. It's like that's just a telltale sign that it's not from the Bible, because the Bible was founded a long time before that. So anyway, but this definition of a disciple is pretty good. I mean, it is what it is. A person that follows a teacher, a student that follows a teacher, that looks at that teacher in an elevated state and looks at them as a leader. A lot of disciples would die for their leaders and go that far. So at this time period in the first century, Jesus was certainly not the first to have disciples. It had been happening for a long time. So discipleship was a really common educational model at that time, actually one of the best educational models at that time. And there's a lot of value to that educational model. It lends itself to learning by experience, by hands-on experience, by specific guidance that is very meaningful to the disciple. So Jesus demonstrated this in all of his teachings, where he would apply real world examples and experiences that would help the disciples to get to that deeper understanding. We see that over and over again. He would use evidences from nature, Matthew 6, the birds of the air he would use. Well, they don't sow or reap, but God takes care of them. How much more valuable are you? So he's using real world examples of nature that the disciples would absolutely lap onto. Parables, we know, are another thing that Jesus used to latch onto something his disciples would get. So there's a hands-on experience. They're with him. They're experiencing this teaching, and Jesus is crafting his teaching to be very experiential. You could really understand because he's using real life examples for the people that were around him. I think that this idea of discipleship is something that we lack today quite a bit. It was a great educational model. It was great to have hands-on experience. We might call it an apprenticeship today, but there's not a lot of those going on. Most of the time, you go to school, sit in a classroom, get out, and then your discipleship at the place you work is the first 2 years of your job, where you don't know what you're doing for 2 years, and you try to finally figure it out. So it's a really great educational tool, just from a layman's terms. But think about the time that God chose here to send the Messiah to create disciples. This is when discipleship was at its peak. It was one of the prominent educational models that existed. So God, in his wisdom, this time period was perfect. It was crafted, because of the roads that existed from the Roman Empire, from the educational systems that existed from the Greeks. All of this was in place, and not to mention this idea of discipleship that had grown to be very prominent at this time, and a really simple thing that everybody understood. So for Jesus, it was very easy to start talking, start speaking, and have people start following. Today, I don't think that would happen today. They might follow him on Snapchat, but I don't think it would be the same thing. So discipleship was at its peak, and God sent the Messiah. It's just another glimpse into the wisdom and the timing of God. So disciples are what we are. Disciples are what we are meant to create. That's what our push is, our drive is. That's what God has told us that we need to do. Matthew 28, the Great Commission, he told the apostles to go make disciples of all men, make followers of all men. And by extension, he's talking about us as well. So all of our efforts result in this idea of a disciple, of a follower of Christ. So it's interesting. Well, we'll talk about that when we apostle. I want to get through this definition of apostle before we're done. It's the same thing I was going to say before. I'm just really itching to get that out, but I'm going to get there. So that's a disciple. Let's go through what an apostle is, because this is where it gets really interesting. So an apostle, on the other hand, so a disciple is a follower of a teacher, follower of a leader. An apostle, on the other hand, it literally means the sent out, the sent ones. An apostle is an official representative, and that's the difference. So a disciple is a follower, a student, a learner. An apostle is an official representative, somebody who already knows and can speak with authority for that teacher, on behalf of that teacher, on behalf of that leader. So the apostle really becomes a leader in and of themselves. So Jesus, when he chose these 12, he provided them with knowledge, he provided them with additional power, he provided them with authority because of that additional power, among other things. He provided them with all this so they could fulfill their role as an apostle, so they could fulfill their role as this representative of the teacher. So this definition is the definition of disciple was pretty good. It's pretty spot on. This is where we get off the rails a little bit, because an apostle, we know what an apostle is. An apostle's definition is very small. It's very short. There's not a lot of places you can go if you really know what an apostle is. Just in this definition, what we see is the world taking a very prominent, important biblical principle and watering it down. And it's really clear as we go through this. So an apostle, we start out with the first definition there of an apostle. One sent on a mission. Okay, we're doing pretty good. One sent on a mission. That's right. Then we have such as, and we have to get into this. So one sent on a mission, such as one of an authoritative New Testament group sent out to preach the gospel and made up especially of Christ's 12 original disciples and Paul. So there's really three things wrong with this. I don't know if you can guess what the three things are. It's pretty close, but there's three things wrong with it. I don't know if you can guess what they are. Does anybody have a guess of one of the things that kind of lumps Judas in there? Doesn't mention Matthias, right? Authoritative New Testament group sent out to preach the gospel and made up especially of Christ's 12 original disciples. As we go on and understand what an apostle is, it's not made up especially of Christ's 12 original, 11, and then Matthias and Paul. It's made up only of, or specifically of. So you start to see some cracks here in this definition, especially when you start getting a little lower, you start to really get watered down here. So now we're going from something that's sort of close, touching on what an apostle is, to 1b, which is the first prominent Christian missionary to a region or group. Now we've expanded what an apostle is. This is man getting his hands on this idea of an apostle. The first prominent Christian missionary to a region or group, Saint Boniface, the apostle of Germany. I'm assuming he's the first one that went into Germany. So now the idea of an apostle has been watered down, right? Now the power that was imbued upon them by Jesus, the knowledge, the authority to fulfill their role, all that is now gone, because Jesus didn't do that to St. Boniface. So we've watered it down a little bit. Now you get to the second definition. Now we start to see the world really working their magic with this idea of what an apostle is. So now an apostle, second definition, is also a person who initiates a great moral reform or who first advocates an important belief or system. So now we've taken Christianity out of, we've actually taken religion out of the idea of apostle completely. Now an apostle is simply a person who initiates a great moral reform. So for instance, Martin Luther King Jr., you could consider him an apostle here. He instituted a great moral reform. Great man, not an apostle. So we see how it's starting to get watered down. Now the next one, we not only take all the religion out of it, we actually diminish the idea of an apostle completely with this next 2b. 2b, an ardent supporter, an apostle of high technology. What's the difference between an ardent supporter, an apostle of technology, and a disciple of technology now? There's no difference now. All of a sudden, an apostle is the exact same thing as a disciple. But we know that's not true. And then we get really specific in the last two, where we've taken the idea of an apostle, now it's just a title. So the highest ecclesiastical official in some church organizations. And then even more specific, one of a Mormon administrative council of 12 men. So this is a great example of what the world does to biblical principles. When I looked at this definition, I just started laughing. Like, this is a hilarious lesson. It's right here for us. We're going from something that was once sent on a mission all the way down to something that is completely meaningless. So an apostle, the definition of an apostle was an eyewitness of Christ's ministry and his resurrection. We know that because in Acts 1, 21, 22, when the apostles were together awaiting the Holy Spirit, they talked about the need to fill the spot that Judas had left empty. And of course, Matthias was the one they chose. And they laid that out. What did this person need to be? What were the qualifications of this person? And it was pretty clear. So an apostle is an eyewitness of Christ's ministry and his resurrection. And I didn't get all the way through this because this is a really good kind of meaty topic, but we're already over time. So we'll pick up there unless you guys have some other questions or comments. Yes?
Well, I thought possibly that the word apostle appeared kind of after, or was used after Christ's death. Not?
It was from, if you're referring to the apostles instated by Christ, yes. You're referring to, I think it was...
I understood that the disciples walked with Christ and he selected an apostle was someone that kind of the same thing, but they did not walk with Christ. They may witness his death, but it was used more after.
So, I hope you're here next Wednesday because we'll get into it more. So Jesus, when he selected these 12 men out of a group of disciples, he named them apostles. He gave them extra power so that they could have authority and show their authority. But these apostles, when the Holy Spirit came on them, they were direct representatives. They were able to speak for Christ. The disciples couldn't do that. For instance, today, Sean got up here and gave us a great lesson from the Word of God. Sean was not up here speaking for God. He can't do that. God was speaking to us. He was presenting to us what God was saying to us. So there can't be any other apostles, and we'll talk about that some too next week. There are 12 apostles of Matthias and Paul, and that's it. And part of how the world has twisted it, and we see it right here, is that the apostles. You'll see the idea of an apostle throughout the denominational world. That it's just like the Catholic Church has bishops and popes, and it's all of these titles that have been created or pulled from the Bible. We see preachers called pastors, where a pastor is specifically an elder. So this is the world taking that language in the Bible and crafting it into something that is man-made.
And they're also referred to as saints, too.
Yes. Absolutely right. And we'll get deeper into that too as we go through this. So any other comments? I'm excited about this lesson. I don't know if you guys are. You may not be after tonight after I went through the first part of it, but it's going to get a lot better. All right, thank you very much.